My name is Mohammed Nur Hussain. I'm, as Charlotte said, a board member of the Brooklyn for Peace, and also chairman of United African Congress, one of the sponsors of this event. My duty here is really to introduce you the speakers. But before that, I think the crisis in South Sudan has been festering so long without the kind of attention that it should get. From 2013 to 2015, something like 1,890,000. By now, there probably are 2 million refugees, have been made refugees. And Uganda alone has close to 900,000 of them. There are some 400,000 in Ethiopia and another 400,000 in Sudan, all living in squalor, in camps that are not really fit for proper habitation, cholera outbreaks and malnutrition. In addition to all of that, there have been 2 to 3 million people who have died of starvation, basically over the years. And so this is a humanitarian catastrophe that's unfolding, not to mention the conflict that has been between the president and the vice president and their forces, which are increasingly taking the appearance of some kind of ethnic directed attacks. And like one of the speakers earlier wrote in a paper in Daily News, this is a genocide in the making unless some intervention takes place. So with that said, I would like to introduce the speaker now. What we're going to do is Milton would come here and give us an overview, and Professor Haile Selassie will follow. Milton Allimadi is the founder and publisher of Black Star News. He is also adjunct professor at the John Jay College. He is a human rights activist and has been bringing to the world's attention the goings on and the actors in this catastrophe who are making this to continue. So he will tell us more about that. Professor Haile Selassie is the Luxembourg Distinguished Professor of Law, Law, and also Professor of African Studies. He's got actually a long list of accomplishments in his lifetime, but I would rather not dwell on that now. I will tell you more about it when he's about to speak. So to start off the program, to give us an overview of the situation in South Sudan, I call on my friend Milton Allimadi.
I suspect the reason why most of you are here today is because when you see the conflict, not only in South Sudan, but in other countries, whether it's an African country, whether it's Syria, and you see the humanitarian catastrophe, and you probably wonder, what can I do as an individual? Because sometimes these conflicts look like they're spontaneous, like they're always happening, so you're confused. Can it really end? Can we really do something effectively about it? So I'm here tonight with reference to South Sudan to say that yes, indeed, we can play a critical role, because in South Sudan, as well as in many African countries, the United States is a big player. The United States exerts considerable influence. In fact, I would say the predominant influence, particularly in South Sudan. The United States is the primary sponsor of the Ugandan government. Uganda receives about $750 million a year in US taxpayer support, and about $170 million of that goes to the military. So why am I starting with Uganda and not South Sudan? Because Uganda is the major player in South Sudan, has been the major player for many years now. And without dealing with Uganda's undue and negative and destructive influence in what is going on in South Sudan, we will not be able to resolve this problem. So this means we have to address the US support for Uganda. Only the US really can rein in the Ugandan regime and get it to change its destructive course in South Sudan. So let me give you some very brief background. South Sudan won its independence in 2011. It had been engaged in many decades of warfare against the central government in Khartoum, a central government which did not have much positive contribution towards the southern part of the country. And that's why the South felt the urge to break away from the rest of Sudan. Ultimately, a deal was negotiated and South Sudan became an independent nation in 2011. And Salva Kiir became president and Riek Machar became vice president. And they had led for many decades different units which ultimately had merged as the Sudanese People's Liberation Movement and Liberation Army, SPLMA/A. Then in 2013, a political crisis emerged between Salva Kiir and Riek Machar. And most of the regional African countries became involved in trying to resolve the situation. They wanted to mediate between the two when hostilities broke out in December 2013. So Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and several countries, Sudan, became involved in negotiating a solution. But while Uganda was officially part of the mediators, Yoweri Museveni, the ruler of Uganda, for the last 31 years now, was playing a very destructive role. He actually sent his army into South Sudan to support one side in this conflict, which was President Salva Kiir's side. So this exacerbated the situation. Rather than a political crisis, now we have a full-fledged civil war with atrocities being committed by the government army, as well as the armed supporters of Riek Machar, who himself was driven out of the country into exile. So, but a lot of pressure came to bear on both Salva Kiir and Riek Machar because of the humanitarian catastrophe that was being created by this conflict. So ultimately, a deal was arrived at, a peace agreement was signed. Salva Kiir signed very reluctantly, but he signed nonetheless. In fact, the US is on the record as saying he would be sanctioned personally if he did not sign the deal to end the conflict. So he put certain conditions that he added unilaterally as an addendum before he signed. But he signed ultimately anyway in August 2015, and the same government was put back together. So Riek Machar came back from exile and became the first vice president with Salva Kiir as president. This arrangement, the transitional government of national unity, lasted only until last year in July. Once again, Salva Kiir attacked his vice president's residence and forces, and again drove him out of the country. And that is how we arrived at the calamity that we now face in South Sudan. And I believe Salva Kiir attacked because he knew that he could always rely on the military support of Uganda. Museveni would prefer to have Salva Kiir as the only person in charge of South Sudan. He feels he can control Salva Kiir, and that is the problem. So now the United Nations appointed a group of experts to study the situation, and they delivered a report to the Security Council in April. And in this report, it makes clear Uganda's negative role in this conflict. It also blames Salva Kiir for being primarily responsible for the escalation beginning in July 2016. And it describes some of the most unimaginable atrocities that are being carried out against unarmed civilians, against women, against children. And some of it, I'm sure you've read in articles in the New York Times, where even children have been dismembered and thrown in the rivers. How do you do this to other human beings? And that is how the refugee crisis has been created. Now we have 800,000 in Uganda, maybe about 2 million displaced domestically, and 60% of these are children. The report also makes it clear that there's only a political solution to this conflict, even though it makes clear that Salva Kiir is still trying to pursue a military solution. The report also makes clear that there cannot be a solution without bringing Riek Machar back into the equation. So obviously you start thinking of what are some possible viable solutions. That's why, if some of you saw the article that I wrote in the Daily News, the New York Daily News, the op-ed, my proposal was that perhaps both Salva Kiir and Riek Machar should have their forces disarmed and bring a truly neutral international force to provide security in the country and to act as the police force, and to also protect the country from Uganda, to make sure that Uganda's army will no longer be able to influence events in southern Sudan, while at the same time you're providing security for the South Sudanese. You're bringing a force that has no incentive to commit atrocities against the people of South Sudan, and that is why I made that suggestion in the op-ed I wrote in the Daily News. Let me just highlight a few more points, and then I will save the rest for when we get to the Q&A. So the question that you may be asking yourself Why is Uganda playing such a destructive role in South Sudan? A number of reasons. Number one, the Ugandan dictator has been in power for 31 years. How has he been able to accomplish that? With US support. As I mentioned earlier, the United States provides Uganda with $750 million. The United States trains Uganda's army. The United States has a base, a military base in Uganda as we speak. That is how he's been able to survive for such a long time. And what does he do in return for the United States? He serves as the regional policeman, just like Mobutu, the dictator of Zaire, which is now Democratic Republic of Congo, used to do in the 60s and 70s, a reliable US agent in the region. So for example, when the US wanted African troops to be based in war-torn Somalia to try to prevent Al-Shabaab from taking over the government there, Uganda was very happy to provide 10,000 soldiers, which it did. So in return, General Museveni gets a blank check. So what incentive does he have in crises in South Sudan? By creating turmoil in other countries, it deflects from his own repression within Uganda. So right now, even though there's a lot of political repression, suppression in Uganda, when compared to South Sudan, you know, Uganda would appear almost like paradise. And he does that deliberately. This is not the first time. He's done it with neighboring Democratic Republic of the Congo, were invaded in 1997. That led to atrocities, multiple wars, and the Congo has lost an estimated anywhere from 6 to 10 million people as a result. And that was due to Uganda's invasion. So he creates regional turmoil to divert attention from his own domestic repression. But then there's a second critical issue which has emerged in South Sudan. South Sudan has oil. South Sudan has oil. And that, I believe, is now playing a role as well in the crisis. There's been media reports that there's some shady companies based in Uganda, based in Kenya, and some based in Ethiopia that are brokering oil deals with Salva Kiir. And obviously Salva Kiir is desperate for financing to buy arms, so he's signing these oil deals. One reported deal was signed with a company called Oranto, which is supposedly owned by a Nigerian. And I say supposedly owned because a few years ago, Oranto signed an oil deal in Liberia, but then within a very short time, sold that concession to Chevron. Now, recently, Oranto signed a deal, reportedly with Salva Kiir. Oranto promised $500 million. I don't know if that money was paid or not. But Oranto does not have the capacity to exploit oil. So I will not be surprised if Oranto's intention is to sell that concession to another company. Might it be Chevron? Might it be another US company? Might it be other major oil company? Who knows? But that's the recent development. So now the question emerges, are oil interests also escalating and perpetrating this war by supporting Salva Kiir, thinking they can do business deals with him, even though they know quite clearly well, as the UN said, without bringing Riek Machar back into the equation, this conflict is just going to continue. And of course, the biggest victims, as we are aware, are the civilians, the women, the children, and the elderly. Thank you, sisters and brothers.
I would like now to introduce you, Dr. Barakat Haile. I know him for a long time. He has served as the youngest Attorney General in Ethiopia way back when. You can imagine. I think in the 50s or 60s or something. 60s. And he's been, he served the Ethiopian government in various capacities. Then he ran afoul of the system there and left the country. He worked at the World Bank here for a while. And he was called on by the, when the revolution broke out in Ethiopia, he was called back home to help, with the new country developing its constitution and so on. But again, that revolution eventually turned sour. The military took over, and he had to run for his life. He's always been active for the Eritreans' right for self-determination, and he went to Eritrea and brokered peace between the two fighting factions of the Eritrean Liberation Movement. But eventually, and then he was called to write the constitution of the new nation after it became independent. He did write that constitution, but the current dictator shelved the constitution aside, and his life was threatened. He had to leave the country, and the last several years now he's been professor at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And so, without further ado, I mean, there is a lot you can say about him, but let's stop at that. He'll probably tell us a little bit about the constitutional development, the Constitution of South Sudan, and perhaps whatever else he wants to add on that. Okay.
The kind of story we heard about Salva Kiir's tendency to want to dominate and to eliminate the rival is typical of dictators in Africa, including the one who happens to be ruling my own homeland, Eritrea. I'm not surprised that Museveni tried to become the regional hegemon of that area, because President Isaias Afwerki of Eritrea tried to become the regional hegemon of the north of the Horn of Africa, which is why we had a war between Eritrea and Ethiopia in 1998. People who know the history of Eritrea and Ethiopia, I'm sure understand the story why there was a war between 1998 and 2000, which was started by an attack committed by the Eritrean army on a region of Ethiopia called Badime. So that war is called the Badime War, started by Eritrea, which I stated at that time, even though many Eritreans opposed me for saying that. But my devotion to truth, telling to power, was confirmed by the decision of the United Nations Commission that was asked to mediate between Eritrea and Ethiopia. They declared Eritrea the guilty party in terms of starting the war, even though finally they awarded the cause of the war, the casus belli, Badime, which was taken by Ethiopia. They awarded that to Eritrea. So that's the only part in which Eritrea could be said to have won the case. Now, the reason why Eritrea started the war by the decision of the dictator without consulting his colleagues, without consulting the parliament, even though it's a rubber stamp parliament, there was a parliament, one would think that in a decision which involves taking people to war, which involves blood and treasure of a nation, one would think that it would be very natural for the president to consult, at least consult the parliament. He did not. He simply, thank you. He simply went to war, sent his army to Ethiopia. And the analysis of the Ethiopian people at the time, the leader, the late Meles Zenawi, who characterized Isaias's characteristic as Bonapartist which is a take from Napoleon Bonaparte, or Bonaparte, as the Italians would say, that this Bonapartist tendency was the reason why the Eritrean leader took us to war. He had tried, in fact, as far as going beyond Uganda and to Rwanda, and using Rwanda as a base of operation. He even tried to influence as far as Congo Zaire at the time. But then they joined hands with Meles and helped in the overthrow of Mobutu. At that time, at least, they were on speaking terms. But then I think Meles saw the ambition of Isaias as a real ambitious potential hegemon of the area, which included Ethiopia, who wanted to be the power to decide things in Ethiopia and beyond. And that is the real reason why we went to war in 1998. So I was not surprised when I heard Milton talking about Museveni's, wearing Museveni's design on South Sudan, which is tragic because I was part of the expert committee, which helped in the drafting the constitution of South Sudan. And after that, I was invited to attend the ceremony when South Sudan became independent. I could not, for family reasons, accept the invitation. But I was connected, vitally connected with people there, whom I had known before, some of whom I had known before, whom I admired and loved, and had the highest hopes that South Sudan would be one of those success stories, as we had also hoped Eritrea would be one of those success stories. Again, we are doubly disappointed, double jeopardy. And the result, of course, is the war, as we know today. Which brings me to ask the question, or to make the point that writing the constitution, even the best constitution, is not going to be enough to create a system of government, democratic government, under which the people will have control of their governments. We have to do something. I don't know exactly what that something is, but it probably involves going beyond the formality of making a constitution, but involving the people, particularly women, who are the most to suffer in this kind of situations, involving women and all members of society in being part of a process under which they will become the deciders of their life. And in this, the international community, governments like those of the United States, the organization of the European Union, of course, our own continental body, the African Union, above all, should be involved, vitally involved in detail in the making it possible, in the process of making it possible to make the people masters of their destiny. Unless we can do that, then it's not enough simply to have a constitution, a peaceful constitution. So my plea to us, all of us, is to think in terms of enabling people, empowering people, creating the right environment under which the military especially will be under the control of people, and the government under the control of its people, so that people will not just order the military to go and shoot people. It's a Herculean task. It's a very difficult task, but it's something on which we have to make decisions because one death is too many, one too many. But deaths of thousands in horrible ways, the slaughter of people that's going on in South Sudan and in East Congo. They shouldn't forget the Congo. That's where it started, actually. That's where it started. And Darfur, when Sudan, before even the breakup of Sudan, had actually committed genocide. And the ICC, the International Criminal Court, had actually declared the leader of Sudan, President, what was his name? al-Bashir, a genocidaire, genocide. And I've given a few lectures on this point in terms of international law. And the application of international law in terms of sanctioning Sudan was blocked by China and Russia. China has oil interests in Sudan. And oil, like other resources, has now become a source of curse. We now know in political science this term of the curse of resources. The curse, instead of becoming the benefit or the cure or the blessing, it has become the curse. And oil has become the curse of South Sudan. And the mineral wealth of East Congo, the Kivu and Goma provinces of East Congo, have also become a curse of the people of Congo. I have been reading a novel, which I'm not getting any money for it, but I'm just going to recommend it to everybody. This famous British writer, John le Carré, has written a book called The Mission Song. Anybody read it? The Mission Song is on the story of Eastern Congo, of how the fat cats, that the book calls them, in Kinshasa, are involved in a conspiracy with outside interests to rob the people of East Congo of their wealth and also to subject them to incredible cruelty. It's a very interesting book. I just bought it because I like John le Carré's books, but this one is of special interest to me because it speaks incredible story of how he imagined a syndicate composed of Europeans representing the international community to try to save the Congo. It's new, fairly new, and there are passages which are of great interest to me, in which this syndicate in the story says this. One of the characters, a very attractive character, who is an elder of Eastern Congo, who is approached, and other characters, by this syndicate, European syndicate, representing the goodwill of humanity, trying to save Eastern Congo. And this man tells the people assembled, "Gentlemen, it is very well known what I want: peace, prosperity, and inclusiveness for all Kivu." Kivu is a province of Eastern Congo. "Free elections, but only when stability is established. But peace, gentlemen, is also well known, does not come of its own accord, and neither does freedom. Peace has enemies. Peace must be won by the sword. For peace to be a reality, we must coordinate our forces, repossess our mines and cities, drive out the foreigners, and still install an interim government of all Kivu that will lay down the foundation of a true, enduring, democratic welfare state. But how can we do for ourselves, gentlemen? How can we do that for ourselves, gentlemen? We are crippled by discord. Our neighbors are more powerful than we are and more cunning. Neighbors in this case being, of course, Rwanda and Uganda, particularly Rwanda in this particular case. For our course to prevail, we need your organization." So there's the syndicates who come from Europe. "Gentlemen, we need your equipment and your expertise. Without them, the peace of my beloved Kivu will forever be an illusion." That's what I say to the non-namers, because the syndicate no names, because they didn't give them their names. Those who were my words. And then he says, "This syndicate is called Nothing. It is Nothing Incorporated. No name means no flag. No name will help to make us rich and united, but it will not own us or our people. With no name, Kivu will for the first time own itself. And when that day dawns, we shall go to the fat cats of Kinshasa, and we shall say to them, 'Good morning, fat cats. How are you today? You have all got hangovers as usual, I suppose.' Well, fat cats, we have some good news for you. Kivu has freed itself from foreign invaders and exploiters. The good citizens of Bukavu and Goma have risen up against the oppressor and received us with open arms. The surrogate armies of Rwanda have fled, and the genocidaire with them. Kivu has taken back its mine and put them into public ownership. That's the end. I think Milton has proposed something in the piece that he referred to, which I read today. Perhaps during question time, you should elaborate on that, what you done. And thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Barakat. I think the rest of the time we'll be using it for questions and answers. But if we get to that, I just want to throw a question to both of you. There are those who have been following events in the Sudan, political pundits and analysts and so on, and journalists, who say that South Sudan was rushed into independence without really resolving some of the issues that were there, that were left at the time of independence. And some people are calling for some kind of trusteeship. Perhaps if either one of you can address this issue, and you're thinking about that.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you for the question, brother. The issue of trusteeship, I think that's a definite non-starter in the 21st century. And, Africa has a very bad memory when it comes to not only colonialism, but trusteeship as well. What later became Southwest Africa was supposed to be a trustee, and it literally became a colony of South Africa and had to fight for its independence, and then it became Namibia. And just the association of the word trusteeship with the colonial era, I don't think that's something that the Africans in general or people in South Sudan would find something that they could tolerate or swallow. But that does not mean that there's no need for serious intervention in South Sudan. And that is why I actually proposed in my op-ed in the Daily News the neutral, independent, outside armed force to take care of security. So in a way, it would be exercising almost the powers of trusteeship without the connotation of being a trustee. Because I think if the people of South Sudan sacrificed and fought for almost 50 years to free themselves from domination from Khartoum, I don't see that they would accept being a trustee of any other entity. But I think, as of today, both Salva Kiir, particularly Salva Kiir, since he's still the one being identified as pursuing the military aggression, as well as Riek Machar, I think they've lost the argument of being the guarantors of peace and security for the people of South Sudan. I don't see why they would object if they were told that they can remain as political players. They can, in fact, recompose the transitional government of national unity, maybe for a fixed period leading toward elections, whether it's 5 years or 6 years' time, and have other political players involved as well. Riek Machar and Salva Kiir are not the only aspirants for political leadership in South Sudan, but during that period, none of them should exercise control over armed forces, given the history of how the armed forces have conducted themselves since South Sudan became independent. So you're not denying them political participation. In fact, you're saying now both of you will be able to make your case in the political arena without worrying that the other side is trying to kill me. Your safety and the safety of the rest of the citizens of South Sudan is now assured by an international neutral force while you maintain your political aspirations. And that's why I made that proposal. I think that proposal is possibly much more acceptable to both Salva Kiir and Riek Machar than imposing a trustee forcefully. I think they might actually be willing to accept it. I see the bigger problem being Uganda. I don't think Museveni would be interested in that. He would no longer be a player in South Sudan, and that is something he would not want to lose. Let me add one other point on how diabolically clever this Ugandan dictator is. Now you have about 800 to 900,000 refugees from South Sudan being hosted in Uganda, which is very good. Ugandans are generally very open anyway and have always hosted refugees, whether from the Congo and whether from when South Sudan was still Southern Sudan, when they were fighting against Khartoum for the 50 years. So Ugandans always hosted refugees anyway, never to this size and extent. But now what is Museveni doing? He's trying to milk political and diplomatic capital out of this. So even though he was the primary arsonist, because when Uganda intervened in 2013 to support Salva Kiir, it was quite ruthless. Uganda's army used cluster bombs, which is banned internationally. And this was reported by Human Rights Watch, which asked for an investigation. And no investigation was done because, as I said earlier, the United States has provided diplomatic cover for Uganda all these years. So anyway, now you have the arsonist who exacerbated the crises in South Sudan wanting to be a diplomatic player now. So he has proposed, and the United Nations has agreed to co-host a refugee solidarity conference in Uganda, co-hosted by dictator Museveni, and one of the guests is going to be the Secretary General of the United Nations. The same United Nations who discussed a report in April implicating Uganda in these atrocities. Now you're going to have the diplomatic image of the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, standing on some podium with the arsonist in Uganda and talking about the good work that Museveni is doing by hosting the refugees from South Sudan, when he in fact is the one that lit the fire. And that is why one of the steps I've taken today, I created a petition on change.org, and I invite everyone who's here today who wants to do something to go to that petition. It is addressed, Guterres, don't let Museveni use UN to politicize suffering of South Sudan refugees. I hope you read that petition. If you agree with it, I hope you do sign it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Milton. Yeah.
I'll just add a word which is more technical. I think Milton's answer has given the substantive answer. But I would like to emphasize the importance of the African Union as the continental body, the African Union should actually shoulder the responsibility for helping resolve disputes. After all, it has become a better institution than the OAU in the writing of its constitution. I had a small part as a member of the commission that wrote the OAU Charter. And in a matter on which the African Union is better than the OAU is in its structure. It now has a structure of a commission led by one chairman, commissioner, chairperson, and the deputy chairperson, and then 8 commissions, one of which is a political commission, the other is Commission on Peace and Security. These two, and particularly the second one, should shoulder the responsibility technically and practically and creatively to create modalities under which future abuse of power, future genocidal actions will be avoided. The late Professor Ali Mazrui, my colleague and friend, once wrote a wonderful piece under which he said, one reason why there are oppressions in Africa when there are no equally divided small nations. And Tanzania is the prime example of that. Where you have one dominant ethnic group or 2 ethnic groups, then the chances for oppression are there. I think it's a wonderful insight. And therefore, one of the things I think that had been done in terms of creating the modalities of avoiding and resolving current problems is to emphasize the importance of the small nations, small ethnic groups, and in the structure to make them participants in making decisions. In other words, reduce more the power of the dominant groups like the Dinka and the Nuer, and enable the others. Scores of them have more or less equal power in this. I think that can be done. Something which we miss, I think, in the making of the Constitution. But then we must learn from our mistakes. Thank you.
Dr. Burke, can you hold on for 1 second? Earlier you mentioned the role of women. You know, we all know that the primary victims of these atrocities are women. And also in the peacemaking, women have played a significant role, such as in Liberia. That's how they ended the war there. And can you elaborate a little more about the role of women in this situation?
I don't think it needs elaboration. It's a cardinal fact of life. Women are not only half of the population, but they are the most important in this respect because they bear the consequences of such tragedies. And because of this, they instinctively feel that peace is more important than war. Peace is the way to go in terms of resolving disputes. And I think if women are empowered, specifically given power, and supported by institutions, by international community and national bodies, they will be able to play a part in terms of resolving disputes, as they did in Tanzania at one time, in Zanzibar. In Zanzibar, yeah. I have a piece which I think Dr. Muhammad has a copy of, in which I mentioned the role of women, and that was mentioned in conferences in Africa. We don't say enough, I think, about the importance of women in terms not only of taking part in practical things in their own life, at home and in the society, but also in terms of actively participating in the resolution of conflicts, and also in helping avoid the occurrence of conflicts. Thank you.